With Broken Truth today, we are fortunate enough to have the lovely and talented Xavier Azalbert from France-soir in France, Paris, France, tonight to talk about a hydroxychloroquine study that he has been a part of that hopes to settle once and for all, again, whether or not hydroxychloroquine is a beneficial medication or not. Welcome, Xavier.
Yeah, hello, John. Nice to see you again, and very nice of you to actually have me on your show. I'm very pleased to actually be here, especially with all the work that you've done with the movie.
And
it's an amazing movie.
Thank you very much. You were one of the first journalists that actually collaborated with me and just said, "Hey, can you put my name down?" Because I did the interview, and it was your interview with one of the Oxford professors. And that was a relief to know that at least one other person out there sees what I'm seeing and is willing to address it. And
you're talking about Martin Landry. Martin Landry, he was one of the co-chief investigator of the recovery study, one of the study that is the most questionable in its construction, but not only its construction, in several aspects. We can talk about it because it's part of the review that we actually conducted.
Oh, good. You actually, it's a meta-analysis, correct?
It's actually not a meta-analysis. It's a review.
Okay.
Maybe I take a step back to actually explain, because it's been 5 years, and maybe for your audience, some of them may be very familiar with the treatment. Some of those may not be familiar with science or the various studies that were there. But in the last 5 years, we've seen a number of issues related to a drug. These issues were related because some professors, some doctors, some scientists advocated strongly that this drug, hydroxychloroquine, in combination with a macrolide azithromycin, could basically put to bed the COVID story. That was in March 2020. And then as we saw it develop, we've seen a lot of obstruction to this science. We've seen doctors who suddenly started by explaining that this drug had side effects, that it would create cardiac problems. And they tried to use a certain types of standards to, in essence, put that drug outside of the reach of the patients. They tried to disregard the science. They attempted to add risks to that drug. And it is normal that after a while, an investigative journalist like myself, also a scientist, I ask myself, okay, what is true from what is wrong? 5 years down the line, we still have a lot of controversies over the merit of that drug. A combination of that the merit has to be evaluated between the benefits and, I would say, the risk. And the thing that's the most striking is when they put out this injection, they evaluated this injection on a certain type of standards, meaning they didn't have any information whatsoever on side effects because they had no background data and they had limited experience with this drug, simply related to the actual study that Pfizer, for example, Moderna did. And therefore, they've applied double standards. They've applied a very strict standards to all treatments such as hydroxychloroquine, and they applied very lenient standards, both on the benefits and on the risks. As we know, the corpus of science has evolved, and they try to rationalize ex post the injection sort of merits, but what they could not hide was the fact that there were numerous side effects. There were more side effects with that injection than with any other therapies. And therefore, it was totally natural that we looked at what happened. This is what I believe you did with your movie, because you tried to break the truth and you tried to go, in essence, pretty much like the Elon Musk team with Dodge is doing right now, which is you try to understand what the money, where the money comes from, the consequences. And if I actually go back to the actual science, 5 years down the line, it was necessary to look at the entire story, to look at all the studies, their biases, in order to put this story once and for all to bed. Are there benefits or are there risks? And in fact, the conclusion is there are more benefits than there are risks. And if they had used the same standards as been used for the treatments, the therapies, injection therapies, then probably the injection therapies would have never gotten approved. And that is something I would say as a introduction. Maybe to close, the reason why I say it would have not been approved is because under FDA regulation, there is one additional rule. There's 4 conditions, but one of the conditions to approve a vaccine or an injection is that there are no other available therapy. So the very simple fact that hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin or many other treatments could have shown some positive effect with little side effects, and on top of it, at a cost which is incredibly small, because we're talking about cents rather than hundreds of dollars or tens of dollars. So it's a minute cost. Then we would have ended by preventing the marketing, the dissemination of these therapies. And the reason why we did this review is really because there's been a lot of individuals who are scientists, politicians, the media, who have tried to break the story that hydroxychloroquine was a lethal drug, was a drug that had some side effects, that a drug that did not work. And what they're doing, at least for COVID, what they're doing is they are, in essence, creating an image around a drug that's been around for tens of years. And they're creating problems in the mind of many people, like people who have lupus. They are taking hydroxychloroquine for a long time. People that were traveling in Amazonia, they were taking Nivaquine and chloroquine or hydroxychloroquine to prevent from malaria. And therefore, if you go to your doctors and you say, well, I don't want to take that drug because I've heard on television that this drug is not good or it has some risks, you are likely to bring your patient to have a loss of sense. And the objective of this study is to put this story to bed and to say, hold on a second, it is a loss of chance if you are preventing a doctor to have a private discussion with these patients, because it's the privilege of a patient and his doctor, and to identify the best drug for himself, or the best compound of drugs, because it can be a cocktail. So that's what we did. Now I can go into more detail, John, if you want, about that, and to give you some biases that we've seen. You presented a lot of these biases in your movie, from failed and fraudulent science to key opinion leaders that go on television and who are really point blank lying to the people about the benefits, to journalists who are not even asking the questions around this. And that was the idea behind this. It's a 12-page document, has over 50 sources. We've looked at the corpus of science. It's a group of doctors, mathematicians, microbiologists who work on that. And we attempted to put this to bed. Now, there were a number of elements which I believed were critical overall, which very few people have spoken. There is a study out of Brazil by a physician, doctor in physics, who his name is Emmerich, and he is not a medical doctor, but he looked at 2 states in Brazil, 2 neighboring states, Amazonas and Pará, and that was in between late 2020 and March 2021, and he identified statistics just by looking at the number of deaths per million. In one state, it had 296 deaths per million that was para, and the neighboring states, 1,645 deaths per million. It's 5.5 times more. And I was struck by this information, because if you have two states with pretty much on the same latitude on Earth, the same type of population, the same type of income, the same type of DNA and origin, why would there be such a difference? Surely there must be a reason for that. And the only external reason that they could find was in para, they had systematized the early treatment compound. That is to say, hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin, ivermectin. I don't know the detail of which drug they actually did. And for me, as a journalist, I got really interested, and as a scientist, because I said, well, surely this will be of interest for our politicians. It will be for interest for many people. So that is what I call an external validation, because it's impossible that any pharmaceutical companies manipulate this data, because this is unmanipulable. And therefore, I thought this was really very important to look at. Now, to go back to the story, if you remember in March 2020 or in early 2020, we even had sort of President Trump went on national television and talked about this drug.
Right.
And there is a journalist in Brazil, and many people will say this drug has been politicized. And it basically suffered a anti-Trump, I would say, movement.
Yes.
And therefore, anybody who were talking about this were associated with a Republican, somebody that had no studies, that did not know what he was talking about. Basically, it was a way to discard your opinion. And therefore, the opinion of that drug, and whether it was efficient or not, whether it had side effects or not, didn't matter. If you spoke about it, you were associated by speaking on the wrong side. Now, you and I have been researching this, and we know that this is not sufficient to actually prevent us from digging. And this is what we did. We dug. Now, it was not sufficient to politicize this. They also had to actually build a story, a narrative that worked. And the narrative was, well, let's use very expensive study to test trial that drug against other drugs. And when you're going to do a test trial, you're going to test a certain protocol. And no study, no research that were published studied really the protocol that was advocated by Professor Didier Raoult in France. None of them. They always find a reason to either increase the dosage or to give it to patients which are too late in the sickness. And he was always advocated on a very low dose, hydroxychloroquine combined with azithromycin, after having done the PCR test, after having verified the conditions and whether the patients would have some adverse reactions to those kind of drugs. So they did it normally, like any doctor would do, ask you, say, well, are you allergic to this and that? And if they felt the patient had some cardiac risk, they would actually do an electrocardiogram. And they've done this. They've prescribed that to over 30,000 patients. And they published this study, and they have a result of 58% drop in risk either of death or being hospitalized, which is really a very, very important result. Now, everyone has tried to discard the opinion of the scientists such as Didier. Now, how do you discard this? Well, as I mentioned, you create very expensive studies, such as the recovery study, and you give 4 times the dose, 4 times the hydroxychloroquine dose. That's 2.4 grams on day 1. Now, the person you spoke about in the introduction, Martin Landry, is one of the chief investigators. He's basically the boss of this study. I had the chance to interview him, and I asked him, what is the lethal dose of hydroxychloroquine? He did not know. And he basically said, oh, I guess it's 10 times more. Now, if you look in any book in France, we have a Vidal, which is the book that describes at which level a drug becomes lethal and the side effects and what should you do. And in the US, you have the same norms. At 2.4 grams, they basically tell you, well, go straight to the emergency room and you should get a stomach watch because you have a risk of overdose. So clearly, these guys gave very high and overdose level. Professor Piron, one of the member of this study that we did, is now retired, but he was a leading professor in infectious disease in France. Very well known. He had all the honors. And when I interviewed Martin Landry, I made him listen to the tape, and he say, "Hold on a second, this guy is confusing two drugs: hydroxychloroquine for a different disease and hydroxychloroquine." And I basically printed this. That was in June, I think the 5th of June, 2020. So clearly there were some issues. This guy did not want that drug to work. Now, on top of it, that's not sufficient. They gave it to patients that were hospitalized. They were at a very late stage, very advanced stage, very weak patients. So the results is following. They have about 25% of the patients that were treated with hydroxychloroquine who passed away. And there's about 25% in the control arm that passed away. The conclusion is there's no difference in lethality between those two drugs. So clearly, in that study, despite the fact that they overdosed significantly with that drug, they almost had embedded in the result of that study the fact that this drug is not lethal. This is a big part of this paper. It is the unraveling of how wrong can you be with a major piece of research of this nature. Now, that study has been used by WHO, recovery study, by every health agency around the globe, and is still used today as the study that put the hydroxychloroquine into the camp of should not be used. And that in itself is a major fraud. In the US, you have Professor Xavier Azalbert, who's a professor at Stanford University. His name is, I would say, on the appointee to be the head of the NIH. One of his mission is to revert to the right science and to penalize all of the publishers who are going to publish bad science. That study falls into, I would say, the group of bad science, science that we should not do, science which should have never happened, probably science that has been biased by money or by ambitions, by the doctors who want to actually get the Nobel Prize or whatever award that they were seeking, because I believe that one of them or the two of them were knighted in the UK. So they basically got an award. I mean, and as we all know, corruption is not about money. It's also about position. It's about the social position. That study is really a bad study. There's been numerous other studies and numerous other attempts, because the way you actually discard a treatment is through various time study. You have to pile them on top of the other. One of the studies you spoke into your movie was a study that came out of Lyon University in France. I'm sad to say that the French contributed to a fraudulent study as well, and to try and discard that drug. That study claimed that hydroxychloroquine would have killed 17,000 people around the globe. With the same group of scientists and a few others, we managed to obtain this study retracted. We were the first one to send a letter of concern to the editor, and that was on the 7th of January 2024, and in August 2024, that study got retracted, which basically means that it is incorrect. Now, within that study, which we published our letter of concerns, we explain clearly the bias in recovery. And that was the fun. Okay, thank you very much for putting this out. That is the study that was done by Alexandre Pradel, who is a ghost author because we've never been able to actually speak to her. And the person that has
really,
never. Alexandre Pradel, it's not even absent without leave. We just don't know who she is. It's her only publication. And there's been a number of investigations that we've conducted on the other authors to try and identify what they really did. Now, the interesting thing about this study is that you have these 6 individuals, but you also had a professor in France called Mr. Mathieu Molimar, and this guy was their marketing guru probably, because he went on every television show that was possible, and he claimed there were 17,000 deaths. Now, and he basically based his statement on this study, which was false. Now, none of the media who spoke about it, they retracted their statement. So most of the people in France and in the US are still under the impression that hydroxychloroquine is a toxic drug. So not only it doesn't work, but it's toxic. And basically, from our point of view, it is impossible that you treat patients such that way. And the purpose of our study was really to inform the community, the scientific community, but also to inform individuals and like yourself, patients about it. So we try to write it in a way that is readable by anyone. So maybe if we go back to the study.
Sorry, do you want to go back to the original study, your study?
Your study? Yeah, to the one we've just published.
Okay, stand by.
And I want to actually just point out a few things.
All right.
So if you look at the abstract, the abstract is something that should be readable to everyone. Okay, it basically stipulates the following thing: is that there was a study on 30,000 patients it's a retrospective study, so it cannot be influenced by big pharma, and it fully confirmed its effectiveness. It's been validated by another external studies and bioscience group of scientists. So what they tried to do is they tried to say that Professor Rao and his team did not follow the code of ethics in France, but they were applying a different code of ethics. They were applying an Anglo-Saxon code of ethics that doesn't apply in France. So they tried every trick, every single thing they had in their pocket to in essence bar the way to these early treatments. Now it turns out that the University of Bordeaux, where Mr. Molimar operates, had a very large contract with Pfizer. They were also doing the pharmacovigilance.
Now these are just coincidences, right?
Yes, these are numerous coincidences, and as we know, there are numerous coincidences around the world that goes on at present. And in fact, all of these super coincidences that comes from the sky, sometimes when you have 1 + 1 + 1, you have to ask yourself whether there isn't some truth into that.
Right. So that was the premise of my entire movie, was just something's wrong. These studies are being manipulated, and it was such a ridiculous effort to do it. I couldn't believe other people fell for it. But nobody asked questions of science because we have this sort of blindness to someone in a lab coat or a uniform. Oh, well, they must be an authority. They're telling us the truth. No one would believe that they lie.
So these are all the cognitive bias, because you have the bias of authority. So basically, because it's mainstream television and it's a well-known figure who has no knowledge of medicine or science, who say something, then you should believe that individual. But to be honest, if I started with the politicization of this drug, and when Trump mentioned this, he probably should have prevented from doing this, because what you do is it's a disrespect for the actual treatment itself, because you're bringing it into the political arena, whereas it should have actually stayed into the medical arena. And I believe now, presuming that Robert Kennedy Jr. will be appointed as the head of the HHS, that he and his team, with somebody like Xavier Azalbert, we will be on the right track to not only make America healthy again, but also to make science, I would say, right again, or to be science unbiased again. Because what we have actually done in this study is we've identified those biases, and that's what we try to do. Is we did not have rigorous science. So the first thing is, in the scientific community, none of the experts, apart from those that had their voice silenced, ask questions. So I ask questions, my voice was silenced. Professor Rao asks questions, his voice silenced. Jay Bhattacharya asked questions, his voice silenced. It was even called a French scientist. Martin Kulldorff of Harvard asked questions, he was silenced. So whenever you oppose yourself in a structured manner, because none of us is doing it in a violent manner, we always did it in a very structured manner. And the more structure you were, the harder they try to actually hit on you. So rigor is something that needs to come back, and also unbiased science. And this is what I hope Jay Bhattacharya will have his hands free to actually do that. Meaning, when there is a study that's actually being published, that study should meet certain criteria. The peer review process should be a real peer review. There is one of the author called my co-author called Martin. He suggested to actually have a totally open peer review. That basically means it's transparent. So you will be able to see the comment. You will be able to see the link, the conflict of interest that an individual would have in that study. So that's just by staying at the level of the science, we've identified so many biases, and some of them are very complicated, because when you're giving a drug to your patients, you need to take a number of physiological variables into considerations, which are too complicated to do that. But to explain here, but definitely there are some issues in that. The second thing is, once you've collected the data, there are some biases that can be done at the analytical level. And here, as I'm sure you will understand, doctors are doctors, mathematicians are mathematicians, and you're cutting across different fields. I'm a mathematician and statistician by training, and what I try to bring is the rigorous approach to unbiased analysis of these studies. Yeah. And this is an area where we start with in this, because my belief is statistics have actually biased medicine. Because it's so easy to rely on statistics, and if you don't understand statistics, it can turn you can turn the statistics on you. And most people claim they understand statistics, and my belief is, from what I've seen, is their level is below zero level. Okay, they don't even get a grade F in my view. They don't even pass the exam, and so this review is really the evolution of the best review and best evolution and best story around what happened and why we should put this story to bed, that the drugs work. It doesn't work for everyone. It doesn't work in every circumstances, but it works for the majority. From a side effect point of view, of course, some people will be more sensitive to side effects. But if you trust your doctor, and if he should conduct a diagnostic about your personal conditions, and he's the better placed individual to tell you whether it works or not. And the third thing is, when it actually got into the hands of the authorities, which have to approve this, the authorities have actually applied principles on a new therapy that didn't apply in that. And that is a real loss of chance for the patients. And we've tried to pretty much explain this in this study.
What's the fallout like so far? Have you been attacked? I think there's a method of attack now being used on PubPeer, connected to some people formerly associated with Stanford, I think. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, of course, in the last 5 years, we've suffered numerous attacks on the publications, be it on PubPeer, because everybody tried to silence our voices. So it's not just on PubPeer, but it's also in the media. The first thing is they actually try to attack the individual they try to attack the messenger rather than attacking the message, because there are very little things to actually do on the message. We've been attacked by some people out of Stanford, like Elizabeth Pick. So she's one of the one that spearheaded a retraction war or a retraction quest over some of the studies of DGRO. Some studies were actually retracted, but the authors are not in agreement with the retraction. They put a lot of pressure. They hassled the publishers. They used, I would say, techniques which are unethical in my view. And these individuals, this group of individuals who are hassling researchers, they've also hassled people like Martin Kildorf or Xavier Azalbert, Indueshel Pierre Corey. Many individuals have actually been subject to their methods. And it's always the same thing. Let's kill the messenger rather than actually look at the message. So if you have an hour to talk about the efficacy of a drug, well, let's talk about the background of the individuals, whether he took drugs when he was 12 years old, and therefore you fill the gap. And at the very end, say, oh, we don't have time to talk about the efficacy of the drugs. So that's a way. Or if they actually go further and they say, okay, well, you've broken the ethical rules because you're into a pandemic and you have not applied the gold standards processes because you are just in a plane that's about to crash. You have to put your parachute and you have to have one solution. And therefore, you should have applied the gold standard. Wait for the plane that crashed. Wait for the results. So in fact, if we build experience and if we train scientists and if we prepare for pandemics, it is because we want to make sure that we give it our best effort, our best chance to provide to our compatriots, your compatriots, the best response. And in fact, we should have trusted the scientists that have been trained for that. But numerous individuals who are even in the field of medicine and in the field of infectious disease and in the field of mathematics, who had no experience whatsoever, they suddenly found themselves by being experts in the media. And so for most people, a doctor is a doctor. But it turns out that a knee surgeon is not an infectious disease specialist. It's exactly like a plane mechanic is not a car mechanic. Not to disregard the quality of a car mechanic and a plane mechanic, but he is a specialist in certain type of engines.
Sure.
And therefore, he should know better than the guy that's a car specialist. And therefore, what we've seen is we've seen knee specialists or we've seen second-rank scientists or failed scientists or failed doctors who had found their way into the media. They suddenly had their minute of fame, and they were there to actually talk about a very serious issue. And these individuals are guilty of, and I hope one day they'll be proven guilty of having driven individuals away from their doctors, of having contributed to the loss of chances of individuals. And I hope that RFK plus his team will be able to restore the trust that's needed in science, the trust that's needed in medicine. Now, the reason why I spoke about Josh earlier on is because it's like 2 weeks since the inauguration of Donald Trump. They went in so fast. They almost managed to restore within 2 weeks part of the trust of people. So I believe if you hit hard, if you demonstrate results like savings, billions of savings, tens of billions of savings, suddenly people will say, oh, wow, their formula is working. And therefore, they restore trust.
Right.
And I believe that a study like the one we've done is there to actually restore trust, that there are scientists who are honest. There are scientists who are trying to act in the interest of their patient. There are scientists who do not have conflict of interests and receive payments from pharmaceutical companies, or who receive advancement in their universities. Because, as I mentioned, it's not about just money. It's also about social status. And what's very interesting with the method that they decided with the new Trump administration is, I believe, it's citizens who have, it's not a question of having something to lose, but they decided that demonstrating results in a very rapid manner, in an incremental manner, was the best way to actually restoring trust. And I believe that in order to restore trust in science, to restore trust in medicine, you probably need to go very fast in order to and get some results quickly. That's why I believe it would be very easy for Xavier Azalbert to actually put some principles, some rules on some publications or publishers such as Elsevier or BMG or the Lancet, and you basically say, well, hold on a second, if you publish a study that is wrong, it's fine. But if you publish a study that is paid for and you don't disclose it and you know it's wrong, that's different. And in the US, you had the Lancet study that came out of Boston, because it was the advocate of this study was a guy called Mandip Mehra. He was a doctor at the Brigham Hospital in Boston, and I think it's Harvard University. He had a stamp of Harvard.
Right.
And I'm not talking about DEI here. I'm talking about the stamp of Harvard, who basically stipulated that it was the end of story of hydroxychloroquine. 2 weeks later, it was out. I also am one of the rare individuals to have interviewed Mandip Mehra, and I knew that the guy was more or less honest when I actually spoke to. But there's been no investigation into who created this study. There's been no investigation, no criminal investigation, because this study has generated a lot of problems. And I hope that one day or the other we will get to the bottom of that study. Same with recovery, same with anybody that's hassling. Now, Xavier Azalbert has a unique chance. Yeah, he was revoked recently, lost his licenses.
Yeah, it's funny. I stumbled across that. I'm apparently the only person still researching this guy.
But I'm still researching it as well. So
okay, good.
I saw your study. You're doing an amazing job, and it's good that there are more. We should have more people like you and myself who are researching this. But to go back to the issue of publication, I hope that Xavier Azalbert will be able to apply some groundbreaking principles,
right,
and some new principles for appropriate science and for right science. Let me just share one insight, which is the polluter payer legislation. If you're a polluter, if you actually drop some oil on the ground, you're legally liable to actually clean up that mess. And therefore, if you're an industrial and you create pollution into a field, then you will be legally liable. And you can be liable for up to 10 or 30 years, depending on which state you're in. And in fact, that is an incentive method. That is a deterrent for polluter to actually pollute. Of course, you have two ways in the incitation theory. You can incentivize somebody to be a good player, or you can tax him. You can basically fine him to ensure that he's going to be a good player. Now, with respect to publication, I've been advocating to actually apply the same thing to information, and to have the polluter payer legislation applied to information. If you publish wrong science, now if you do it in good faith, that's fine. The system will reject. But if you don't do it in good faith, that means if you do it with intent, then you're contributing to the pollution of information. And we know that a badly and ill-informed individual will take wrong decisions. A general with his army, if he doesn't actually get the right information, he may actually send his entire company to death. A doctor, if he is polluted with information such as the Lancet or recovery, may take the wrong decision for his patient. So we're going to require devices which are creating an incentive for the good doctors, for the good scientists, and a deterrent for those who have been playing with our lives, with our chances, with our the very simple fact that somebody is taking the chance away from me. That should be, at one point or another, it should be penalized. That's why I hope Xavier Azalbert, and he's the reason why I talk about the incentive theory is because he's an economist as well. And the theory of incentive, the polluter payer, comes from the field of economics. And I hope that he will have the idea of doing those kind of things. And that's why I think what's happening in the US is really important, and I'm incredibly surprised, impressed, but at the same time, I'm grateful for this DOGE situation to actually go fast. Because as I say, I used to be a management consultant. acted for transitions, and I'm always an advocate that if you need to do transition, you need to do it decisively, you need to do it fast, you need to do it before your opponent responds. And this is what they've been doing. And I think that's the only way that you can mark the history with your print, but also to persuade individuals that you have the right strategy because you show results. So I hope that Kennedy, with a study like this, or Xavier Azalbert with a study like this, will be able to say, okay, well, we have individuals around the globe, and it just doesn't matter whether they come out of the India, Pakistan, Senegal, Africa. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be American. It has to just follow a number of rules of ethics, which is right science.
Yeah, this system of science that we have is something that I try to cover in the movie, but I've also continued to follow up on because I think we have to go back. We have to look and really understand where we screwed up. Where did the biases get introduced? I did a study or a story this past week about a FOIA request that I did for a study out of University of Minnesota on hydroxychloroquine. And this story was very interesting to me because it was not disclosed in the New England Journal of Medicine that this author of this study, David Boulware, had a relationship with the Gates Foundation. But he had about 100 pages of emails that they released. I don't know what they didn't release. I submitted public records requests for this stuff. So what we found was Gates Foundation was there from the very beginning. And they were involved in quite a few studies too. For example, in this email, they wanted to have a closed and confidential relationship. And they were very curious about the closed and confidential relationship. But another thing that they were doing at Gates Foundation was, let's see if I can pull this up. They, in this email, they wanted to have a better understanding of what it would look like if they found a positive result on the study. They were concerned that the author was going to say that his drug worked. Now, the Gates Foundation was also in touch with Sabine Hazen, and then they didn't talk to her after their initial reach out, which is what gave me the idea to start pursuing these additional FOIA requests or public records requests. And there's a lot more to it. I submitted questions when I did this story to New England Journal of Medicine, Gates Foundation, and David Boulware himself. No one responded.
Well, I wrote a story on this study. I'm looking at it. It's basically on the 5th of June, 2020. So, of course, we did not know that he was funded or could have some links with the Gates Foundation. However, at the time, on his website, we could identify some links with Gilead. And yes. Gilead was the party that, the company that pushed remdesivir, a treatment for advanced COVID that you give in injection. And so this is definitely an issue. I had interviewed, I asked questions to him, but I also asked questions to a Canadian doctor that was part of that study, which her name is Emily Gibson MacDonald. And definitely we could find out, you're demonstrating the amount, but we could find out that study, if they had cut the data in a different way, they would have probably reached different conclusions. So it's very good that you do this, because this study, in my view, is one of the studies that has been used to discard the efficacy of hydroxychloroquine as an early treatment. And the way they slice the data for analytical purposes is clearly demonstrating that they either knew what they were doing or they had somebody that was telling them what they were doing. Because one of the authors, that you could find in the paper that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine is a Dr. Ulcik. And the guy is a author of the paper, because I found this in the property of the PDF file. When you actually do you look for the properties, you can find that. And this guy was mentioned, and that guy was not declared as an author. It's almost like a ghostwriter.
Yeah,
and so for me, all of this is what I would call bad science. I mean, why would you go to Minnesota to actually have a study like this? It's probably because it's easier to actually buy out a second-class citizen such as David Bower, a second-class professor. And he probably didn't realize what he was getting into, and what he was, why he was lending his name to a study of this nature. Well, as I say, it might be advancement, it might be financial interest, but clearly this study is the third study that was out there in order to discard hydroxychloroquine in 2020. The first one was the Lancet. Mm-hmm. The second one was Recovery. The third one was this one. In fact, we could have said that there was another one that was prior to that called the BOBA study. A study that was manufactured, that was created by a doctor out of Manaus in Brazil. They gave very high level, very high dosage hydroxychloroquine to the patients, and they stopped the study because they had too many deaths. But they are now, some of the authors are now sitting on a bench because they've been accused of mistreatment. I think the trial is still going on. I've not actually followed up with this, but clearly the intent was, if you want to discredit a drug, either you actually give it at the wrong time to wrong type of patients, wrong dosage, or you slice and dice the analysis the way you believe. Now, there is a fundamental difference between medical science and mathematics. And medical science, doctors say it should be replicable. The problem is they never publish their data. Never. And so I've asked the data many times because I wanted you to redo the analysis to actually see whether by redoing the analysis, and then maybe I could have found some efficacy. So I've redone many analyses using the published information. I'm using inferential statistics in order to just recreate the past of the corrupted analysis they've done. Now, and that they always leave a track. In this study, they left a track. In Recovery, they left a track. We've reversed engineered the Kaplan-Meier curve, which is a death curve, with a colleague of mine to demonstrate, and we know how they hid the deaths in that study. And we did write a paper which we've never been attacked, which is where are the deaths. So we know exactly how they're doing the study.
Yeah,
it's not just the fact that they give the overdose. Is when it's published, they've really fooled the reviewers, or the reviewers turn a blind eye on that study. Clearly, if they don't understand what's happening, or if they don't want to look at what's the right thing. And so one of the things that Professor Rao and many scientists have done, which is correct, is they've published a raw data. And the ISU was one of the rare scientific outfits or institutes that specialize in infectious disease. They published a 30,000 data on an open server. So you could download, John, anyone could download this. You could do your own analysis. Now, that means a lot to me when somebody just publishes his data, because he is confident that what you will do is you may find different results. And we redid the analysis with the same group of scientists that has published this article that we're talking about. We redid this analysis, and we found, in fact, a slightly better. But this is, it's statistics. You have different way of treating the data, but we did not know how they reclassify the data. We found a little bit better. They have 56%, I think. We have 58% of drop in probability of dying or being hospitalized. But we're in the same ballpark. The results are not statistically statistically significant. So for me, this is an unbelievable way of doing science that should be the way, reproducible. And the second thing that Professor Rao did, which was, in my view, the best thing to do, is they had a bailiff that came and certified the data. He authenticated the data. So they went outside and they authenticated. So what I think we can learn from this, or if somebody had some advice and to give to Jay Bhattacharya, to say, okay, well, hold on a second. If we ask every scientist who are going to be in the medical community to publish their data, and they have to do it. And they're going to say, oh, well, we already do this because we make the data available for scientists who want to actually do that. But then you have to show your credentials, and it takes 6 months, 10 months. Then you forget about it.
Right.
The DORS lesson that should be learned, or the lessons that should be learned from the DORS things, is you have to be able to act decisively, promptly. It's not complicated to read you an analysis of this nature. It's not going to take. What's more complicated is the administrative barrier that they're going to put on you in order to access the data. The second thing is, if the data have been authenticated by a bailiff, it's going to be difficult for them to fudge the data, or to, they will pay a tremendous amount of attention. And if on top of this, they know that there is a penalty if they publish wrong data or fudge data or whatever, then they could get sort of sentenced one way or another. They could lose their positions. They could lose their professorship or whatever. Then I believe there are many ways many tools, many solutions to ensuring that this does not happen again.
Xavier, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me about this. I think we could go on probably forever, because we've both spent years of our lives investigating this. You, I think, probably more than me, but hopefully, let's definitely revisit this in a month and see, hopefully, that Jay Bhattacharya and RFK Jr. and the team are now in place and hopefully making progress. My hope is as swiftly as Doge is doing right now in its current work. I hope it does the same, if not faster, at HHS. They're mapping out the payments. And once you understand where the money flows, then you can cross-reference that with historical opinions and behaviors that didn't make sense. And it's going to open up a lot of insight into our history. It's going to be a valuable time for reporters in history, I think.
It's a valuable time for humanity, in my view, because it demonstrates that when you have a dedicated team, you don't need to be many. It needs just needs a few good men who knows what they're doing.
Yep.
And then you can fight the bureaucracy who are only going to put barriers in front of you for you to prevent having access to the data. Because once you have access to the data, as you said, the payment flows. But if we had access to all the data of the fraudulent science, trust me, you would have a lot of scientists like myself who spend, a month to look at all of this. We would identify the bias very quickly. Now, if somebody gave me access to the recovery data, probably we would find more things that we found. But I guess it's like everything. If you do 80% of the job and you find that it's fraudulent or there are some issues, then you don't need to go all the way. And that's why you need to be decisive. And applying the Pareto principle of 80-20, being decisive, very fast, I think what's happening, DORS demonstrates the capability of a very highly talented and very highly determined team to get to the bottom and to ensure that taxpayers' dollars, that's for the US, but I would be the advocate for the same thing to happen in France or in the UK and many countries, because we've had bureaucracy that crept in. And when you have bureaucracy, it's very far from meritocracy. At one point or another, we know these guys don't act in the interest of people. Now, I've done a survey in France, and our representative sample, 80% of people believe there is too much corruption. They don't trust the governments. Why? It's because they don't believe they act in their interest. And that's, I would say, so restoring the science, restoring all of that can happen very quickly. And this is what we try to do with this study. As we said, let's put it to bed once and for all. With all the tools that we've had like this, we can really help politicians, civil servants take appropriate and informed decision, and we can hope we can restore the confidence of your viewers, your readers, with the fact that individuals like yourself, like myself, are acting in their best interest. As I say, I've never been paid by the pharmaceutical industry for the work I'm doing. I have no conflict of interest. I'm funded by my viewers, by my readers, and that would be the final word probably for myself.
Xavier, you don't get any money from USAID? I think you should look into that. Apparently, it's big business.
Yeah, it's a big business. If I should get a slice, even a thin slice, that probably would have made the rest of my life.
Right. That would
USAID is definitely a big issue because as we uncover, it's out of 44 billion that they have, and there's definitely some issues. But let me give you one data point. USAID is 44 billion for 335 million Americans, more or less. That's about $145 per individual. In France, we have the equivalent of USAID. It's called Agence Française du Développement, the French Agency of Development. They spent $12.4 billion. That's $200 per individuals. It's 42% more. I did a calculation this morning, did a tweet on that. So if you think you're inefficient, trust me, there's always somebody that's worse than you are.
Thank you, France, for stepping up. And, I'll leave you with this, and I think we should come back to it in a future interview. One really interesting thing that's come from the hydroxychloroquine study and everything, all of this, is that it's taught me, at least, and a lot of others, that when you see sort of a coordinated response in the media to cover up a topic, to slander a medication, or to discredit anyone who speaks out about certain things, where there's smoke, there's fire, is what we say in America. And I think we need to go back through the last 15, 20 to 30, maybe even 50 years and look at all these other fires that we thought were fake, that may not have been. We need to reevaluate our history to see where the truth was covered up in the past. I don't think that this is a new behavior, what happened in 2020. I think it was just they took one too many cookies from the jar.
True. And if you actually think about your statement about going back 50 years, let me actually give you two statements from two singers. John Lennon, it say power to the people, not to the bureaucrats. But not to the bureaucrats is my addition. But power to the people, he actually said this. And then Jim Morrison, he said, those who control the media controls your soul, your spirit. And had we listened to these guys, despite the fact that they are probably taking drugs or too many drugs, in fact, sometimes you have some very wise statements. We never listen to that. Of course, we didn't listen to George Orwell either, but we had a singer who said that. My view is there is some truth in those individuals. They probably saw something at the time in the early 70s when you had all of these bands with the LSDs and so on and so forth. A lot of them had some very insightful songs. Stairway to Heaven is one of them. I don't want to actually put all my money on music, but at least I think we should listen to numerous, I would say, fields, not just science, because science got it right, got it wrong, in many times. In fact, science is built on error. It's a trial and error. And songs, sometimes they actually stay. But and let me finish off with one of them called The Police. They actually made an album called Ghost in the Machine. And I think this is what we pretty much had. We had a ghost in the machine.
I think it's a holy ghost in the machine myself sometimes. But Xavier, thank you so much. I'm going to tap us out at 1 hour.
Me on this program.
But we will have you back. Have a great day or night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.